Hello and welcome to something very different at this point. Actually, what the fuck? Somebody just messaged me right at the worst possible time. Hello and welcome to something a little bit different. So we wanted to do a bit of a recap of the recent NSG Gamers Winter Championships, but there's a lot of podcasts to kind of go over that stuff in much more detail than we could do in a succinct way. So this is a team of the tournament. Not only are we going to be highlighting some of the teams that did well in this tournament, but individually picking players from all of the various rosters that did some good stuff, whether it was somebody like LG, who you could name all of the players in a team of the tournament at that point, or some of the other smaller teams that had some really good results, but maybe didn't make their way towards the finals, for example. Joining me for this one is Vansilli, one of the sort of well-known analysts, did First Strike, casted the finals and stuff. Gonna sort of set you up almost to fail in some cases where
not a problem.
If there's a role that you want to start with, I will let you go first, and then if you know it's if it's a snap, we both have the same answer, I'll point it out. But also I want the opportunity to shout out some of the runners up, I suppose, the nominees to potentially being the best Sova, the best Omen, the best Cypher in this tournament. Ooh. So before we get into it, like, what role would you like to start with? Who do you think is like a standout? This was the best guy in their role that they played in the tournament.
Oh man. Okay. Well, if we're gonna go by classes, for sure we have to go by roles, right? So let's start with a Sentinel for sure, and I think you have to go with the winners of the NSG Gamers overall. I think a Proto is going to be the one that everybody's going to be talking about. I think before even going into the Winners Championship, people already had eyes on a Proto and people already had eyes on LG, but because they were a team that are always a revolving door, kind of like Mamabo Gaming, you wouldn't even know if they were going to be a top contender. But we definitely saw that throughout the whole tournament for NSG Gamers with LG, although he did struggle a bit into the grand finals versus Sentinels, but where he definitely shined and definitely helped the team was where his playground was on Ascent. So he was very good on that map. But overall, I think our Proto, in terms of like his mechanical skills, how he uses the trap wires and the cyber cages, but combined with his aim, I think he has a very high headshot percentage for the team to be a great anchor for the team that allows like for him to just play a site on his own and anchor or help the team for retakes, but they don't need to worry that much about one control of a map, especially on defense for LG, and they could focus on stacking up on other places. So I think even though he wouldn't put the numbers up for certain matches, he's definitely a key role for the team.
I mean, that's an easy snap for me. He was very much like the first name that comes in. I think when it comes to LG, there are a couple of players that seem almost obvious that you'd have to put in as teams for the tournament. I think as well, what doesn't help is when it comes to that role, I think there were some really good performances. I think, for example, Infinite and Daps, the way that they actually sort of played their roles on it. I am very much going to stand NRG in this video. I want to put that out because I genuinely think they did really well. I think when it comes to Killjoy stats, Infinite is up there. But I think it's more of a question of, you know, FNS was really good in their series against Sentinels. Certainly on the Ascent game where he was like 18-8 going into half-time. They dominated because of that. But he played the first time ever, I think, in an official, he played Killjoy, and it left a lot to be desired because it's Icebox, and that's typically where you would see even players like Dapper, who is a Cypher one-trick, move over to play on that agent because it's so good. So FNS, I think, is a nominee potentially just because he's always been up there when it comes to it. But Dapper's an interesting one because I think Dapper's performance in this tournament wasn't bad by any stretch, but I feel like a lot of the rounds, certainly for that last Ascent game and a lot of the series that I got to cast because I was pretty much focusing across Sentinels for my casting experience as well in this tournament, he was a first death a lot of the time, right?
Actually, I wanted to chime in on that because, and it's maybe a hot take too, but you know, I've been reading Twitter, after that event ended, and people were saying like, oh, it wasn't the best Sentinels that we've seen. They're kind of like dropping off here and there. I feel that there's a different multiple factors into that too. I think when you're looking at Sentinels as the pedigree, maybe the #1 North American team for Valorant, they're playing tier 1 teams and tier 1 events. I mean, look at the past events that they've played, First Strike, and then you look at the GBL Cup. They never had a chance to really play tier 2 teams. And when you look at past discussions in the past few months where it seems like, oh, there's maybe a gap where tier 2 is catching up to tier 1 and tier 1 is not giving tier 2 teams enough chances, I think that's where it's overlooked when you're looking at the series. So it's not necessarily that Sentinels played badly against LG or any other team. I think it's just that those teams are starting to catch up, where the playbook has to be a little bit more elaborated now for the Sentinels. And when you look at how Sentinels played in the group matches, you know, they got the upset loss versus NRG, right? But when they got into the playoffs, it was a whole different Sentinels too. And when they're playing versus Envy, or when they're playing versus Nbox was a one-sided map series for Sentinels. Like, they dominated Nbox in that series. Versus Envy, it was close games. But we always have those debates where in the top 4 of North America, any team could beat any team, right? We let's face it, that's true. So versus Envy, for sure it was going to be a close series. You have like what, a 2-3 scoreline gap for all of these 3 maps, but they still beat them 8 times consecutively. So I don't think that, like, I mean, that speaks a lot in itself for Sentinels, that they were just playing the normal game. When it got versus Luminosity, though, yes, Dapper wasn't performing that well, but I think it's just how LG played was very similar to how Sentinels play, because we talk a lot about how Sentinels are very good at like trading, moving around, and when they lose a player, they already have somebody else maybe 1 or 2 seconds later coming back for the trade. So when you look at that series overall, it was nothing but trades, and it came down to the clutchers, and the clutchers for me would definitely be Thief once we get into the Duelists.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I think that he's going to be the name mentioned. In regards to special mentions for the Sentinel role, just looking briefly at like average combat score, Depth for Dignitas had a really good series, even though Dignitas kind of went out in negative fashion, I suppose. Obviously, the forfeit from Odorous and stuff. And I do feel like we spoke about it with Press 4 today with Odorous being dropped, where everybody else on Dignitas seems to be really good within their role. And so finding somebody that can play up to the role that Odorous, I think, felt a little bit flat on is a good one. Pure, when it comes to Killjoy, is always going to be up there in regards to stats. I think just on average, when it comes to AD, has a bit of an interesting one, considering Killjoy obviously has damage utility, but it seems that the stats overall very much favored Killjoy players. They could get a lot more stuff done, which I find very interesting going into it. But the fact that A-Proto did so well on an agent like Cypher and pretty much showed up anybody else, I don't even think it's a case that we could debate who it would be. But speaking of Dapper, like, going on to the other sort of, I like to call it supportive role with the Omen and Brimstone. A lot of people called for the Zoms' head after the series with LG. I think, I disagree, because I thought that he was actually one of the better Omens across the tournament. I think it's very hard to have good stats on here, so a lot of it is eye test. And considering that Omen has been nerfed, I've never seen a player connect and hit so many paranoias. So he got his bang for his buck in that retrospect. So he's actually 100%. A player that I would consider for that. Like, if I'm putting a team together, Zoms, even though people were like, he was terribly bottom fragged in the best of 5 series, which I think everybody looked a bit flat on Sentinels, to be honest, in some case or another. I actually think that Zoms' performance across this event was not only very strong, but a bigger improvement over what we've seen from him in the past.
100%. I do agree with you, Ryan, because when it comes down to that, like, yes, ACS is one thing, ADR is one thing, but, you know, when you're a support player, you have to make sure that you have the right abilities that helps in the right moments. And with the Paranoia costing 400 credits now, I play Omen myself, and when you're going into pistol round, you're already going with a Paranoia and Shield pretty much, and you're already at 0, where somebody like Zoms could... And Zoms, actually, when you look at him play the pistol, he instead of going for Shield, he goes for a Paranoia and a Frenzy, because Frenzies are really good and a weapon that's used a lot for Sentinels in their pistol rounds. So he's already weakened at that point for the team to try to be like a sole anchor at some point and choke areas of the map. So having a Paranoia available to flash as many as you can, maybe die in the process, but weakening your opponents, and then allowing the rest to trade off you, I think that's totally fine. But I think when you look at the series again versus Luminosity, when he got to that third map, I think on Split, where he didn't get that much action, but when we actually did see Luminosity try to get into the A site, I mean, his smokes, of course, were good enough, but his positioning on top of that was good to take 1 or 2 down before his teammates could go back for the rotates. So I think in terms of his role, he plays it perfectly, and the numbers actually don't really paint the picture of what he's capable of or what he really does for the team. So as me fighting back to like the comments coming out on the forums or whatnot, you really have to look at how Sentinel plays as a unit to really see which player gives an impact. And which is why, if you're looking at Luminosity Gaming again, it's not really star players in that roster. Of course, we're talking about Proto and Thief, but overall, like, I mean, Stellar also had good games. I mean, I'll talk about him a little bit later once we switch to, I mean, we'd still a Sentinel, so I guess we could talk about Stellar a bit as a Sage. But I think that he does deserve a lot for Zoms to still be an impact player for Sentinels. And just to take a step back, Ryan, when you're talking about Sentinels 2 for depth, I was actually watching more of the death matchup versus NRG because, you know, I don't want to take anything away, I think, from Sedated when they were playing them, but Sedated is brand new going into this event. Lex even stepped down after this event, so who knows what happens to Sedated later on.
Speaking of which, I was going to say, when it comes to average combat score, like the best performance, like the highest ADR, it was Lex on the Brimstone, 24 rounds. So
he was good, man.
Yeah, like genuinely. And I think when it comes to, like, we can sort of finish on the Omen Brimstone stuff. The issue is when it comes to, like, Food is a player that I think deserves a bit of credit, considering all of the other teams, like Cloud9, I'm looking at, you've got NRG, you've got all of these teams that regularly change who's playing that controller role based on the map. And like Cloud9, you could put any of the players in as an MVP, considering the circumstances they were in any of the roles. But the issue is, like Lee, for example, played 96 rounds of Omen. Doesn't really give us a clear indication of going, he was a standout Omen when he wasn't maybe even the best Omen on his team at some point, right? So I do think that considering Food is like really settled down to be on that role, he did a lot of work in a fragging capacity. That Envy Sentinels game could have gone either way, to be brutally honest. But I do think that when it comes to, we're looking at like Cute Fat Boy, who played a lot of rounds, obviously. Boy for Unbox that played a lot of rounds because they were the teams who got to the playoffs. You start to see their stats just dwindle over time because their stats get watered down because of the amount of games that they have. Zoms is consistently there. He played more rounds than anybody else on that role, and he is very much still in the top percentile. So, again, you can't look at stats, but the fact that he's still there after playing 400 rounds of an agent, some of which were terrible games for him, sure, shows that he is just a consistent thing in there and definitely doesn't deserve the flack that he's been getting. Are we in agreement that we'd put Zoms in as the Omen controller player, or are there any other players that you think spring to mind? It doesn't have to be based on, oh, they played a lot. Even if it is somebody like Lex that did play really well, we just didn't see them go very far in the tournament or get a lot of rounds in because they were pretty much eliminated straight away. Like, are there any other people that spring to mind that you figure are worth a shout out?
I think just Daps trying to use Brimstone from the get go with the like just a recent nerf, and they already have to go into play. He brought it in a couple of maps. Infinite brought it as well. I think it was decent, maybe not anything that surprising. I honestly would probably agree with you and still give it to Zoms. But another smoke player that played in the series was LG with Stellar. But Stellar, his numbers were decent in there in the series versus Sentinels, but where he very much shined was in as Sage, actually. So I will agree with you to give it to Zoms at this point.
Cool. So we have a pretty much solid team. Now, this is where it gets interesting. I want to talk about Sova. I think Sova is his own role entirely, right? The thing that makes this interesting is, I think when you regards to the top two teams, Sentinels and LG, I don't think Sinatra had a great tournament. I don't really like, whilst Moose had some really clutch rounds, he also felt like he needed to warm up a little bit to the role, to the occasion. So he certainly has the ability to be an amazing Sova, don't get me wrong, but I don't think this is the tournament where you can specifically pick him out and go, he was the best at his role.
No.
Who is your like Sova of the tournament? Because I'm very...
I'm sure you agree with me. I'm hands down EU.
Yes, that was my pick. Okay. So it's between EU and BCJ, because BCJ is on something for Exit right now. I'm also kind of like leaning on the complexity result as well, where he did so well. Like, it's no surprise that Exit were kind of like, Brando, fuck off. Like, we're getting this guy in. I don't think it was straight up like that, but it was just great to see how BCJ came into that team and was insane. But I think EU... Somebody said before the tournament that they considered you or EU, whatever the hell he calls himself now at this point. We got told off for calling him wrong, but we still kept calling him So
he doesn't want to correct it
something.
himself, so I'm gonna have to message him later and be like, "Yo, how do we really say your name?"
Yeah.
So I'm still gonna stick with EU at this point, but definitely I do agree with you, Ryan, at this point. I mean, BCJ. If imagine what Sedated would look like if BCJ was still in that roster, right? I mean, they had such a close series versus Dignitas where Lex popped off, and if they had a player like BCJ who was like God tier in Battalion 1944, and that's where most of these players like kind of know each other from Battalion and Call of Duty. It shows that they have that chemistry to be able to have like maybe upsetting wins for the team. But BCJ, of course, with complexity is a huge thing. But if you're focusing really on the Nursery Gamers Winners Championship, EU, I mean, this guy is a clutcher. This guy is somehow like even an anchor. Like he's so good for retakes for the team. He's a great addition to energy. And for me to look at energy of where they were before to where they are now with the recent additions that they had of Infinite and Shanks, it's a great great signings for the team. Although I think overall you're still trying to see where Shanks is going to find his level of comfort in the team, because right now we haven't seen some impressive results from Shanks, but seeing that a player like Sova is able to top frag for NRG, and then they have Som that's able to find his footing as Raze, it does add a lot. And as you mentioned here, Ryan, when Infinite is also playing very well, just recently switching from CSGO to Valorant, and have decent rounds on decent map when he plays the Killjoy, and the great in-game leadership of Daps, I think this team is definitely going to go far, hopefully during the Challengers Tour.
Yeah, the momentum that some of these teams are going into VCT for is staggering. It's always very inconsistent as well. Except was a prime example of this tournament where everybody's like, oh, they won the Complexity Ned Street Gamers tournament, they're going to be insane. Immediately, like, bottom out. Losing to, like, the team that got smashed by them on multiple occasions, who then went on to win the tournament. So I think that was very much a rite of passage for them to really get over 100%. That. I think with EU, the point I was going to make before is somebody, I don't know if it was as a meme, if it was a typical Reddit spicy take, where they said that EU is a top 10 player within North America. And I was entertaining the idea throughout the weekend and the week. I'm very much on board with that. I genuinely think that this player has not set a foot wrong. On T1, we really didn't see the level of play that we're expecting from him. Even then, it was very minimal. And it was playing the Brimstone and trying to IGL at the same time. So typical T1 fashion, they kind of throw him under the bus and then go, oh, he's not performing. I wonder why. Even when NRG looked like a bad team during First Strike through the early qualifiers, the first time that we really saw them, he was a standout player. He was one of the best clutchers, and I think that the fact that he's been able to perform like that throughout and get better as his team around him performs, even just stuff like he had the fourth most utility kills in the world when it comes to Sova, behind people like Jumba, who used to be on Vodafone Giants, and behind Hiko, who obviously is very good at using that utility. And I think that whilst people like Sinatra get picked up and brought up as one of those like star players, and I'm sure there's other ones that on the top of my head that spring to mind right now, EU has to be within the top 3 Sovas within this region and top 10 players in North America.
I don't know about the top 10 in North America. I feel that that's a hot take, but I think if we have to look at in terms of like Sova skill play, like a Sova individual that's able to play very well at a high level, you're right. You think about Hiko right away. I think about EU right away. I think about Danny from Time In, which unfortunately is not in this tournament, but he's definitely for me like the number 2 Sova in North America, just under Hiko.
Yeah. And I think that whilst Sinatra had some great individual moments, some nice plays, such as the fake when he got caught up by the recon bolt in the game against Envy, the clutch rounds that he had on Raze, like all around, Sinatra is a complete player and one of the best in the world. But in this tournament, he did have a lot of poor rounds as well. I think it was the sense of consistency, whilst Sinatra obviously enabled his team to go further in the tournament, literally with some of the rounds that he won. You got to say the EU is looking like an individual standout player. And I think that when I say like top 10 players within North America, it's almost like the HLTV rankings almost, where you look at the players, they're all from different teams, right? Because the scene is so close. Whereas if you were looking at First Strike and you'd say, oh, who are the top 10 players in North America, you'd probably list off all of 100 Thieves and then like bits of TSM, bits of Sentinels, bits of Envy.
Yeah, exactly.
Not so much of a one player from this team, one player, going through the top 10 teams in the region. So I think in that retrospect, EU is one of the carry players, MVPs, and an obvious answer, I think, for putting him in as the Sova of the tournament. Now we get into the interesting like double duelist. How would you do it? Because I think that there are teams like LG that didn't run a Jett, but I think that in regards to this, having the best Jett of the tournament is probably a cool award to be having. So, were there any standout Jetts for you that are worth highlighting? Because, again, I feel like my answer is pretty straightforward, but I do think there's more competition for this one.
I'll definitely give a shout out to Rob Wiz in terms of Build by Gamers. I mean, he's always been a Jett player and now and hasn't really switched to anything else. He's had some very good numbers, but again, he wasn't really tested going into group play. And not to discredit anything into their group stages, but I mean, they had like a forfeit win, I guess, in the end versus Dignitas, if I'm not mistaken, with the whole issues of Odorous. And then before that, I think they played like, or it was Sedated, or it was Ghost, or it was one of the United, and I think they passed through that pretty easily. So, and again, I don't think it's anything to discredit those three orgs, but I think it's just because they're new into the scene, and now they even came in with brand new rosters, right? When you're looking at United that brought in a couple of guys from Mamamo Gaming, it's just like 2 players, and then you're looking at 3 other players that come from whole different rosters. They're still trying to find their vibe in the tournament. But Rob Wiz definitely had a lot more consistency in this event versus what they had the previous week in the Complexity Nursery Gamers tournament. But my number one would probably have to be Mitch for Cloud9.
I actually had a bit of a different answer. I had 2 that I was waiting on, depending on what you would say, honestly, because
so it was one or the other that you would want to go against me.
Yeah, watching these 2 players match up on the Jett op was genuinely a spectacle, and I don't think it got a lot of credit that it deserved. And that was Shazam versus Mummy. I think that Shazam, considering that he also does sort of IGL the team a little bit, looked incredible, actually. Again, Sentinels underperformed in some cases, sure, but I think when it came to playing an all-around Jett, I think Shazam did better. If I was to pick a Jett opper, it would be Mummy. Again, I like the fact that Envy... I get a bit antsy when I see teams like, oh, we're playing on Bind, so our Duelist is going to play on Sentinel, and then our Sentinel player is going to play on Phoenix, and then our Omen player is going to play on Yoru. It just kind of makes me go, like, you can't really get a cadence of what they like to do. And that was my issue with Envy before. So I like the fact that they've really settled on it. And I think performance-wise, they looked really good. I think in regards to... I'll have to double-check this, actually, with, like... I'll do this right now, but Mummy versus Shazam in that series, they were literally, like, 34 and 33 frags total. I'm going to have to check the 1v1 stats, but I was genuinely impressed with both of them, considering I didn't rate them that highly within that role. I mean, you've not got Wardell in there, for example. You've not got...
of course.
Like 100 Thieves, for example. Now, so Mummy, across all of the series, was 10 and 5 against Shazam. So I think based on that, I'm going to give it to Mummy, because I think that Envy, considering how awful they looked in previous tournaments since First Strike, how they performed in First Strike 2, I think that this was all around a much better look for Envy. And it's similar almost to like Team Liquid in First Strike, where you look at that result and go, Envy didn't play well, but Envy lost and they can't beat Sentinel, so that's not a good look. But then you see how the rest of the tournament goes and you go, that's not a bad result from Envy. So I'm going to give it to Mummy, actually, for the Jett.
So Mummy, I do like that, because even like you said, they found like a more consistent rule for each of these players within the maps, because I even think now that Mummy is opting on Ascent, right, as Jett instead of switching over to Omen. But the thing is, for me, is like, I do like the fact that players could flex into different agents and changes the play style based on who likes to play what agent on what map, which is why I really like where Envy was going into First Strike, which is why I do like how Sentinels play with Sick playing a different agent into every single map that we saw in the Grand Finals, which is why even I have to give a lot of credit to Cloud9 in terms of the amount of agent switches that they had and a brand new roster when they had a surprise drop off from tens, right? And you have a brand new in-game leader in Vice that's calling out for the team, and suddenly they've become such a good split team where Split notoriously is a map that is trying to be avoided by a lot of the teams overall. I mean, it's Icebox was, of course, omitted a lot because the map just came out. But if you take, for example, Sentinels, they always pick Icebox as their first map now because they don't mind playing Split because they're good on Split. And then you have a team like Cloud9, if you're a brand new roster in a best set of 3, usually you would tend to want to try to skip Split and try to skip Icebox and the Vetoes. But then they become really, really good on Split. And that's also with Mitch's opping that he was able to do, I think, versus United. I think he got like 21 frags onto that one too. And the reason why I want to give it to Mitch was that Mitch was already opping in the beta days of Tens and Friends as a Sage. So he was like a entry battle Sage, kind of like the first ones that we saw with David P over in Europe. But he was still able to op as Sage when she was also like some sort of a mid at the beginning to be a Sage opper when Skadoodle was also opping as Sage. So you already had an idea that he wants to play some sort of duelist role. He's already comfortable in a type of role that's going to play a Jett. But when you're Cloud9 and you're trying to build around tens and let tens pop off, then you as a team player will have to try to fill what seems to be a good role for you. And he was very, very good as Killjoy before, but I think he unlocks a lot more potential for the team now in Cloud9, being able to play as a Jett opper.
Now that we sort of got that roll over, it leaves us with the final duelist. We've kind of mentioned already who is going to be getting this award, so congratulations, Thief. But I do want to use this opportunity, I suppose, before we get into why he was easily the best player of the tournament, bar none. There are a few worthy nominees, I think.
Yes.
For literally every team, I think. Six Phoenix on Haven was one of the better ones, just how it looked. I think in regards to all of the top teams, you've got Android in there, who played a lot of Phoenix, played a lot of Reyna, looked strong on that. Ye is also a good mention for the Jett role as well. It feels bad to not include Ambox and Nox more in these kind of conversations, but I feel that their overall team performances as opposed to one particular player standing out. But before we get on to Thief, are there any other like nominees that you have of players that deserve a role? Because I also think Tex from Equinox.
Exactly that. That's why, because you said Nox, but you didn't mention his name. I was like, wait, you got to mention his name. So Tex definitely for me was like a very close second to Thief. Actually, if it could have been a whole different story that, you know, if it got into that series where Equinox eventually won that series, there's a potential that Tex could have been the best duelist in that event. Because if you look at the clutch percentages that Thief was able to bring versus Sentinels or just overall in the event, it's actually tied with Tex too, I think at like 29%. And the headshot percentage that you have for Tex is also very high compared to where Thief was. I think if you even look at the ACS and the stats here, Ryan, Tex is also ranked very much higher with lower rounds played, of course. Maybe that's the reason why, but he was still very up there, being a key player as Reyna and Raze for Equinox. And I think he is probably the key reason why Equinox is on the up and up in 2021, how they look very, very good in the Complexity tournament and how they look so good in the Winter Championship. And I would probably be very disappointed if Tex doesn't get picked up by Equinox as their permanent fifth, so that they could actually evolve with him as a player.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it comes to Thief winning the award, but I think my second place, you've got Tex in there. I liked Android. I really liked Android. I think that when you
can't discredit that for sure.
It's like if you've got Ye playing a Jett full time, you as the other duelist on the team need to be very flexible depending on the map. I don't think it's as like Tex, for example, could just one trick Raze and it would be fine. But the fact that Android has been so good across the other duelists, he only played a bit of Reyna, but like his Phoenix was solid, his Raze was solid. They're certainly worth highlighting. Som had a really good tournament as well for NRG. One player to note that's actually very bizarre is Nismo from Ghost. His stats are unreal, and he played a good amount of games too because they went down to the elimination bracket and won their game. I didn't get to check those games out, but I think when it comes to a player to watch for the future for Ghost, it has to be him because nobody else from Ghost is near him when it comes to how well he performed. For sure. But we need to talk about, you know, the duelist of the tournament, the player of the tournament. What made Thief so much more successful in this tournament? Because he's always had games and series where he's done stuff like he did in this tournament, but to do it consistently for a best of 5 against one of the, if not the best team in North America, how did he unlock that? Because that's just the next level for him, that he's been able to do that consistently. Same with the pro, or same with everybody on that team, but you got to say, from an individual perspective, nobody shined quite as bright as Thief did.
Yeah, I think the way that he used his kit, especially as Phoenix, was just amazing for the team for a couple of the retakes. I think the run it back into like the bind to like a 3 or 4K, or just when it comes down to, yes, because his performance is very high. I could also think that it's because of the fact that all of these trades that are happening between Sentinels and LG throughout the series, when it comes down to a 2 versus 2, I think even Profi kind of like tweeted it out, or somebody else was saying, like, when you think everything's going right for LG, it just seems to go right. And he was just on point of where he wanted to, or where he would guess where Sentinels would be playing, like the pulse plants or 2v2, and just locked in. I think I mean, for any other given day, you could give it back to anybody else from Sentinels to be able to win that series and just be on point for that game. I think he was just on a different level and feeling it. And the tenacity that the team has overall, right? I mean, they've played all of their games in full series after losing an X at 2-0. Everything else was like a 2-1 to a 3-2 going into the bracket. So I think another reason why Thief was able to be so good is just because playing a 1 hour match, playing a 3 hour match, or playing a 5 hour match is just playing one match for him. And he's always going to be like very focused, I guess, in his gameplay for the team. I don't think necessarily it was anything super flashy in terms of him. Well, they had some super flashy rounds for sure, but I think it's just a coordination that you have with your team to be able to get those frags and get the rounds was what really helped him be on the 1-up versus Sentinels, at least more specifically.
Roka has the kind of performances that Thief had, and Som certainly had those kind of performances, but nobody had it consistently, and nobody had it over the 2 agents that he mostly played with, the Reyna and with the Phoenix. And I think because of that, you've got to give it to him, because he not so much won it by himself, but he was one of the main proponents of why LG looks so good this tournament, and why LG into the future is looking to be maybe a top 10 team now going into the VCT tour and challenges. Just to sort of, in conclusion, I guess our team of the tournament, I think pretty much unanimously can be agreed on this. We've got the Sentinel player, the Cypher, pretty much up full time with a Proto from Luminosity Gaming. The Omen, more of a surprising one, but I don't think there was particular standout play from any controller. But the fact that he was Old Faithful, and almost to sort of be a middle finger to those that think that he was the problem for this team going into this tournament, you gotta say Zoms. I think he was the much more consistent performer. And also his utility, like assists are an awkward one to see for Omens, because not always are those paranoias connected on for actual kills, but I've never seen an Omen get the timing and the positioning of the utility right. The Zoms, I think, takes it. Sova EU, I don't think it needs too much of an explanation. He is looking to be one of the best in that role, bar none. Jett could be very much up in the air depending on what you would want out of a Jett, but I think considering the boots that he's had to fill, you've got to give it to Mitch. And I feel like he's always been in that position where he's always been a good Jett for the triple duelist stuff that C9 have run in the past, where Tens has run maybe Reyna, for example. It allows him to play that role, and he's one of the best at it for sure. We saw that very easily. And Duelist, the player of the tournament, easy MVP, it has to be Thief, and that is a very scary team. I do feel bad that we haven't got any Ambox people in there, no Equinox considering, but I do feel there's so many different examples, but I feel like that's more of an endearment to them, because as a full team they all played well. We just didn't see a standout player carry them in the performance like maybe some of these other teams had, to be fair.
Dude, as we were mentioning, I'm looking at my Word document, because we were like writing down. I'm writing down who you were mentioning and who I agreed with you was like the top player, and this is actually a pretty good North American all-star lineup if we're gonna have like an all-star matchup of like NAEU or something like that, right? I think this would be really nice. I think if it comes down to like 6 men or 6 men or 7 men rosters where you want to try to have somebody that could sub into this, I definitely have to give a shout out to 2 players. One of them is not even American, is of course Sunny. I think Sunny for Sunny for a player that played like 180 ping and still like of course he had an ace versus whoever, right? It wasn't that important of an ace, but I think his utility as a breach for a region in North America that doesn't use a lot of breach in the past few months was actually very good to like uplift Cloud9 to where they were going into their bracket. I think his utility was amazing. The amount of assists that he's getting on his utilities too, not only from Flash but also from the fault lines, I think that was amazing. And his stint with Cloud9 in Korea, he's usually a Sova or a smoke player, so he's like a utility player. So if you want to give it to somebody that, hey, we might have an off day where we want to like have a player like Zoms take a day off or something like that too, I would definitely plug in Sunny into that lineup, and it would still look amazing in the North American scene. I'm saying that because I'd like to believe the rumor that Sunny is actually going to move to North America and play with Cloud9.
I think that'd be cool.
Right.
Sure.
If it's not the case, then my other shout out would definitely be to Sick, because if there's no way that you cannot mention Sick in terms of like a potential MVP. I wouldn't say this. Well, I would kind of say of the tournament too, because they still made it to the finals, and for him to be able to play 5 different agents and still help Sentinels to be where they are into the grand finals is actually very huge. I believe that he maybe didn't have that good of a game, for example, on Icebox, is because I think LG did very well to read how Sentinels plays on Icebox. It's very telegraphed at some point when you watch Sentinels play, where if it's going to be executing towards the A side, they're always going to go off Sick. So he's actually going to go for a guiding light into the top vent so they take control towards the nest. And once they get control towards the nest, then he's actually going to use his Trailblazer and get the information of where their opponents are within the site. And once that's done, they just blow into the site and try to execute. And that's where LG were able to trade as much as they can. But when he played Raze, he was top fragger for Sentinels on that second map, which was Bind, and then I think all the other the only map where he underperformed, I think, was when he played Breach, and Breach was on Ascent. But Ascent, like I said, I was surprised that Ascent was a 5th map, because I believe that LG would have picked Ascent over Haven in the best out of 5, just because they were so good for me on Ascent for their team like LG, simply because of a proto. So to see it go to that 5th map, I pretty much then believed that it was going to be in LG's pocket. And Bach was right. I think Bach said like the only chance that they really had going into the series was winning Icebox, and they did a very good job to understand how Sentinels played that map.
I learned a lot about doing analysis based on how I perceived Sick, because the games that I watched, I think that he was a low performer, and I think that it feels overly critical in some cases, but I think with the Sentinels team, you need to call it as you see it. If Sinatra doesn't perform, you need to point that out. You can't just be like, oh, it's Sinatra, he's one of the best players in the world. They can still have shit performances, it's one of those things. And I do think that, again, a Reddit take that was downvoted to oblivion saying that, whilst he played 5 agents, that doesn't inherently mean that he's good at all of them. And I think, considering he was such a strong performer consistently across that best of 5 series, that goes against it. But I do agree that the Rays, for example, we're not going to see much of, because Sentinels do ban out Bind on a regular basis. So it felt very much like a, shit, what do we even play? We have to play this map, so let's do this. And considering that he did very well, his Breach was very poor, I think, across the tournament. The only time where it was pretty good was in that Ambox game, which I think gives it a bit of leverage. His Phoenix was great. I genuinely was very impressed with his Phoenix on Haven. And his Sage, when appropriate, was very much well played on Split. Sky, I'm a bit more likely to give him a bit of credit. I think on Icebox, it did what it needed to do. I think Sentinels' strats on that map overall were a bit bare bone, and you could literally kind of say, oh, they're going for the Killjoy lockdown play on the high ground, and if we can see it, it's very easy, I think, for the opponents to see those kind of plays too. So, yeah, it looked a bit one-dimensional, but that was Sentinels, not just a Sky. The Sky on Split was the one where it's just a bit like, that's a rough one.
I agree. But even the funnier thing for me is when we look at Sentinels is, yes, we did mention that they banned Bind like every single matchup that they had in the Winners Championship, but I feel that Bind was a map that they're super comfortable in anyways. And maybe the reason why they wanted to ban Bind was just on a whole different thing. I mean, if you look at other teams, I think it was like Envy at some point like banned Bind on every single map in First Strike, and in Cloud9 banned like Haven or something like that, or vice versa, right? Like there was a map where a team just doesn't want to play at all, but I think when it comes down to having to play it, they still play it very well, because Sentinels, we remember the highlight rounds that Sick had on Bind 2 when it was on the B side. I forgot versus who it was, but for him to play around that smoke and get those frags and them overall as a team, I think they're still pretty good. And when it comes down to the interview that Sinatra had with Smix, where he was like, "Oh, we need to work on our ascent." Whoops, I shouldn't have said that. You already had it. It was already like a clicking moment where they needed to work on their ascent, where they're not that comfortable playing ascent anyways. And if you look at the past events, there's been rounds where or events where they actually want to ban Ascent out of the rotation because they're not comfortable with it. So it makes sense. But then when you see them play Ascent versus LG and you see a low performance from Sick, then it still shows that maybe they still need to have some sort of work on that map, where Bind is just a regular ban, at least for me, in my opinion, in for that team.
Sure.
I don't think they're necessarily underperforming on that map as usual.
Yeah. Maybe just isolating it for strats and not wanting to show
exactly
too much. That makes a lot of sense with the Ascent.
That's what you see. Actually, you're right on that, because they and Envy are pretty much the only quote unquote tier 1 team that participated in that event, where, you know, with the Challenger Tour, or the VCT, sorry, just around the corner, there's a possibility that you don't want to show this to TSM. There's a possibility that you want to show this to Gen G or any other top tier team that's watching you play right now, like especially 100 Thieves. I think that's another one too.
For sure, yeah. But I guess that'll conclude everything. We've got like a nice roster put together. We've now included a sixth man, who I think in this case you have to give it to Sick, just for the first time ever we've seen the 5 agents and stuff like that.
Too.
And I do think that, he had bad performances, but let's be honest, a lot of people in this list did too. Like, that's just if you play to the final, you're going to have blips. And I think considering you have minor blips, maybe a couple of rounds, even a full map on one agent, like the Sky on Split was a bit of a gamble against NRG. It didn't pay off, and they learned from that by playing Sage against Envy, which again won them that series when it mattered, just from shutting down Envy's aggressive attacks, similar to how Lowell does it in Heretics, the typical 101 Sage play. But I think we have a pretty good roster. I don't know if it's going to be a graphic on screen or whatever, but are there any closing thoughts you have to have on this team, considering we're pretty much closing up to an hour, which I think is as long as I want this to go? Final things about this tournament or the teams, the players, whatever.
No, I think overall the team that we took, like I said, looks very, very scary. Overall for the teams, I'm just looking for, like I said, it sets a good precedent for tier 1 and tier 2 teams going into the VCT, or even in 2021, where a competition for NA continues to be very, very close, challenging, and I expect a lot of upsets this year.
For sure. I will link all of Vansilli's stuff in the description. I'm sure you're going to be seeing him real soon if you're keeping up to date with North America anyway, but in any case, you can find all of the stuff below. And if you would like us to do this for future tournaments, I don't know why I say us, me. If you would like me to, I'm so used to the hit scan approach of just, we're an entity, but if there's any other tournaments like the Red Bull one coming up in Europe, even just some of the Challenger stages and stuff like that for any of the regions, let me know in the comments. I very much enjoyed this and would like to do it in the future with other guests. So until next time, we'll see you then.
See you guys.